mentioned the matter in court, noted that there was convenient to group people in different groups based on whether they were citizens or whether they were entitled to be citizens because of their parentage. There's also a consideration about the arguments around how you interpret Section 44 of the Constitution. The section itself is a pretty straightforward section. It says that you can't be a Member of Parliament if you hold this citizenship of another country. But what the court's done in previous rulings is say, well, that can't apply to everybody point blank necessarily, so there may be cases where it's reasonable to interpret it another way. But what the government will be asking the court to do is to read very broadly that interpretation as to what is reasonable, because you can give up your citizenship of another country, and if people have made reasonable efforts to do that on the case law, then the High Court may be satisfied that they've taken that step and they're entitled to sit. The worst outcome for the government, of course, will be that members of the party will be deemed ineligible to sit as parliamentarians.
Yes, so if some MPs or senators are found, or all in fact, are found to be ineligible, what does the Constitution actually say, if anything, about the validity of their votes in the Parliament while they were sitting there not eligible? Could those votes in fact be challenged legally retrospectively?
Well, the vote in Parliament is something, as a matter of practice and as practical reality, you don't set aside. So while they're sitting as senators or members of the lower house, the House of Representatives, their vote on bills are normally not questioned after the fact, even if somebody is deemed later to have been elected invalidly. So those votes will still stand. The critical issue will be around ministers exercising their ministerial powers to decide particular things within their portfolios. So, for example, the approval of a particular project, the funding of a particular issue. Because it may be that parties can argue, and there are reasonable grounds to argue, that those ministerial decisions, that is not votes on the floor of Parliament, but actual decisions about projects, funding for example, that those are invalid and they may be subject to challenge. So even if ultimately those decisions are upheld, they certainly may be subject to challenge subsequently.
OK, we'll wait and see. The process has a way to go yet. Fiona McLeod, President of the Law Council of Australia, thanks for joining us this afternoon. Time for a break now. Do stay with us. Coming up next, we'll speak to the New South Wales Disability Minister about the future of the NDIS for the state.
It's easy to get overwhelmed by the numbers, but at Ford, we try to keep car finance simple. There are two parts of the equation, a drive-away price that doesn't change and a low finance rate. Right now, in addition to a great drive-away price, you can get every Escape at our lowest ever finance rate, just 0.9%. That all adds up to a pretty smart deal. But be quick, it must end September 30.
If the government forces online marketplace platforms who connect buyers and sellers to charge GST on all overseas online purchases, many Australians will start shopping directly with overseas sellers. So they'll lose the consumer guarantees offered by these trusted platforms. That means less GST for Australia and less protection from shonky sellers for a collection model that might not even work. So we'll all lose. Tell the Productivity Commission to keep shopping open in Australia. Authorised GL Vic, Disrupt Sport, Sydney.
How fast is your internet, Australia? Maybe it's time to put a rocket up it. My Republic has just landed from Singapore, home of super fast internet. Blast off now! Experience the fastest NBN speed available, up to 100 megabits per second for just $59.99 a month and just $1 up front. With a real Australian call centre. Call 1300 GO FAST and give your internet a blast with My Republic.
Dreaming of winning it big? Dream. This week, bet on our US Power Jackpot, worth over a cool $800 million. Lottoland. Dream bigger.
As a pro wrestler, Iron J, I owe my success to Mum, feeding me Iron J crispy battered fish. And of course, years years of training. It's always been fish and training. Training and fish. I&J helped me grow strong. And by giving you a $5 Rebel gift card with every specially marked pack, right now, I&J are helping you grow even stronger.
Australians start their mornings with Nescafe Blend 43. Proudly roasted and blended in Australia. It all starts with a Nescafe.
All right, bankers, let's get on with it.
Whether you're refinancing, investing or buying your first home, we'll help you find the right loan in amongst the thousands across the market. Get the right home loan by getting Aussie on your side.
Been to Smart Traveller yet?
Mum, you know I don't like to plan.
What if something happens? And I can't afford to bail you out.
Be informed, be prepared. Go to smarttraveller.gov.au. Authorised by the Australian Government.
Well, the Peter Allen Show's back on its rails. You've been away.
Delighted to be back.
Yeah.
There's just so much on.
We're going to talk about Get Up because Peter has done an awful lot of work on this Get Up outfit.
Australians need to hear it. They masquerade as a grassroots community organisation. They're anything but. They're a front for the left-wing causes, funded from offshore foreign donations as well as the unions. They skate past the umpire. The Australian Electoral Commission does not belong to Get Up.
And some of our leading men are at risk. Peter Dutton, Christian Porter.
Absolutely.
They're on narrow margins. Get Up pouring a whole heap of money in. So the Labor Party have got Labor, the unions, the Green Movement and Get Up.
There's got to be greater scrutiny on Get Up on Tuesday night.
And we'll have a bit of a laugh as well, but that's the serious bit. Tuesday night at 8 o'clock.
Must watch on Sky.
Welcome back to Newsday. Well, there are concerns that some people may be left homeless by a New South Wales government plan to privatise all of its accommodation services for people with disabilities. Homes and services which are currently managed by the Department of Families and Community Services will be handed over to businesses and not-for-profit organisations as the National Disability Insurance Scheme is rolled out across the state. Now, disability advocates say that quality of care will suffer as a result, while the Public Service Union is worried about staff pay and conditions. And families of residents who have already been evicted from private accommodation services fear their loved ones will end up with nowhere to live. To get their views from both sides of the political divide in New South Wales, I'm joined now by the State's Minister for Disability Services, Ray Williams, and the New South Wales Shadow Minister for Disability, Sophie Cotsis. Thank you both very much for your time this afternoon. Ray, if I could start with you, please. Why exactly is the New South Wales Government moving to privatise all of its disability services?
Look, I think the important point to make at this juncture is that 115,000 people with permanent disability in New South Wales now have access to the NDIS. It's historic reform. Next year they will have access to a total of $6.4 billion here in New South Wales, which was equally shared funding between the New South Wales Government and the federal government. That funding will be directed to those people with disability, and they will make the choices on behalf of the services and supports that they need to lead a great quality of life. In terms of the provision of services, we are moving to the non-government sector, to some credible organisations that are currently providing 70% of the services already on behalf of people with disability. Organisations who are non-for-profit organisations, so they're not corporations, they're not multinationals, but organisations based here in New South Wales, like the Benevolent Society, like the Cerebral Palsy Alliance, or even Northcott, who are providing 70% of the services to the people with disability right now in New South Wales. So it makes sense to continue on with those great, credible organisations to continue to provide services right across the board to people with disability.
Well, Sophie, you've called for a parliamentary inquiry into the issue. Talk us through what your concerns about what the government is doing are.
Yes, I'm very concerned, and many parents, carers and people with disability have many concerns about the rollout of the National Disability Insurance Scheme by the Berejiklian government. We're on to the Third Minister for Disability Services, and the concern that people have is the uncertainty of services, the gaps in services. The National Disability Insurance Scheme is a Labor initiative, and the Labor government previously has done a lot of work in expanding the capacity of the non-government sector, and we acknowledge the work that the non-government sector and government services that provide those services. But for people with high complex and challenging behavioural needs, there are concerns by parents of those adult children who are currently living in disability group homes that are funded by state government. They are very concerned that once the New South Wales government completely withdraws from the provision of disability services, that there will be no safety net.
So, Minister, what do you say to the fact that there have been some people with disabilities who've been rejected from one or several privately run services because their needs are so demanding, and they really until now have been able to find accommodation in a government-run home? Where are they going to go now?
What I can guarantee is that people who access the NDIS and have accommodation agreements have those agreements in place for a minimum of 2 years. At the end of that period, they can choose to stay on indefinitely, or they can choose to move to more suitable accommodation. Now, as I travel around New South Wales, I've met up with dozens of families who now have their loved ones, people with disability, living only minutes from their home, where in the past they've had to travel up to 3 hours to access their family members. Because of the choice that is provided, those particular agreements will be in place for a minimum of 2 years.
Are there any provisions, though, to prevent non-government organisations from rejecting or evicting clients if, for example, they say that they're unable to support them?
Look, we need to recognise that there are a small number of people with disability who have very, very challenging behavioural needs. If in the case of one of these people that they pose a threat or a danger to themselves or other people in group homes, we need to reserve the right to, if they are incompatible in that environment, that service providers would work together to provide more suitable accommodation. That is a responsible way ahead. However, I can guarantee that people who are accessing and have agreements, accommodation through the NDIS, will have those agreements for a 2-year minimum period, and then after that they make full choices as to what they want to do.
Sophie, the Minister makes a point that private service providers, such as not-for-profit organisations, already run more than half of supported accommodation across the state. If that is working, why not hand the rest over to the private sector?
Well, I disagree with that assessment, because there are currently over 350 group homes that are run by the state government. They're specialist disability accommodation. They're a specialist disability accommodation that provides services for people with high complex needs, and it is the government safety net. The concern is, and the Auditor General in New South Wales stated this earlier this year, that there is still a need to increase the capacity of some of the non-government providers to look after people with high complex needs. This is why I'm calling for a parliamentary inquiry to look at the gaps, to look at the type of gaps, particularly in rural and remote New South Wales, in Greater Western Sydney, and particularly servicing our Indigenous community as well. So we have many grave concerns, and it's already been stated as well in the Productivity Commission that there is no clarity around who is going to be responsible for the safety net, who is going to be responsible for people who do have the challenging behaviours, and who is going to step in. The New South Wales Government is the only jurisdiction that is completely withdrawing from providing state government disability services.
Minister, these private service providers are undoubtedly already under pressure financially. Staff wages are low, and is there a risk that they may fall even further in this transfer from public to privatisation?
Oh, certainly not, certainly not. Look, there is a record amount of funding on behalf of the NDIS. Because of the strong economic management of the New South Wales Government, we have assured $3.2 billion next year will be injected directly to the NDIS, which is matched by the federal government with another $3.2 billion. That's a total of $6.4 billion on behalf behalf of people with disability going forward. That's a doubling of funding, and with that doubling of funding we're seeing an increase in providers, and we'll see an increase in the quality and service and standards on behalf of with disability. I just want to make this point that we have put people with disability front and centre of the NDIS. We've led the way in New South Wales. It's historic reform, and there's no way we're going to drop the ball. We want to make sure that as many people as possible can access the NDIS, giving them the funding and then the choice of the service providers and the choice of the accommodation on behalf of their lives. At the end of the day, people with disability are our community. They deserve to live in the community, and we have some wonderful service providers that are providing a high quality of service, and we look to expand that in the future.
Can I just make a point?
Yeah, sure, go for it.
But unfortunately we've seen that the New South Wales Ombudsman recently released reportable incidents of people with disability who are being abused, where there is violence against people with disability. And over the last 2.5 years, there are more than 1,400 incidents that have been reported. Now, we are very concerned that the government has not taken action up until now to deal with these matters of abuse. This is why I am very concerned, along with parents and carers, that if the government can't deal with these issues now, what is going to happen when they completely withdraw from providing disability services or being the regulator or monitoring the provision of disability services? This is why I'm calling for a parliamentary inquiry.
Minister, do you take that point? I mean, even the Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, this morning has admitted that there are still a lot of teething problems when it comes to the rollout of the NDIS nationally.
Look, we have the strongest protections and safeguards on behalf of people with disability of any state in this country, and that will remain in place. In terms of the reportable incident schemes that Sophie refers to, that was our legislation put in place in 2014, and can I say that provides people with disability, their families and people that work in the industry with the opportunity to report incidents directly to the Ombudsman. And we welcome that. We welcome shining that light on all corners of the disability sector to ensure we maintain the highest standards and the highest quality of care going forward. Now, the NDIA have already suggested that on top of these great reforms and great supports and safeguards in New South Wales, that they will also put in place a National Complaints Commissioner going forward, and also a registrar of compliance on behalf of service providers. So we are not going to see a diminishing of standards, we are going to see an increased standard in terms of the quality of service on behalf of some of the most vulnerable people in New South Wales.
What about the eligibility of people with mental health conditions to have access to the NDIS? I know that that's something that's being debated at the moment. The AMA is lobbying for that to be the case. We know that obviously there's a lot of people with mental health problems that suffer episodic or episodes of mental health that maybe not be considered to be permanently needing this form of funding. But I suppose, Sophie, do you think that this is something that should be made eligible as part of the rollout?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, I think, and the New South Wales government needs to also explain what they're doing in this space. I think that my concern is, going back to what I was saying earlier, is that we still need to expand the capacity to assist people with disability who do have mental health issues, and particularly I've been just recently New South Wales Labor held a roundtable in New South Wales Parliament where the opposition leader, myself and other colleagues, we committed to supporting the disability advocates who are, at the moment, their funding is uncertain, and I hope that the Minister does commit to funding them post-July 2018 because it's listening to those advocates where we can get the policies right and we can implement the right policies, particularly for people with disability with mental health issues.
Well, Minister, do you say that you will commit to continuing to fund those disability advocacy services?
Certainly, and we are doing it at this point in time. We have an additional $1.5 million up until July 2018. And if I could just
But what about beyond 2018?
Well, beyond 2018, the federal government has already committed $60 million to advocacy going forward. But if I could just make this point. Advocacy in the past has involved people lobbying government for funding for those people with disability. Funding is now guaranteed, a total of $6.4 billion for people with disability going forward. That's twice the funding they have ever had access to before. And you will find that the families and people with disability themselves now, through greater choice, become their greatest advocates. They get to choose the services that they want. On top of that, as I've said, the federal government is providing $60 million for advocacy in the future, and there are supported systems within the individual plans on behalf of disability if they require amendments or changes to their plans.
But Minister Porter, who did make that announcement a few weeks ago, also did state that the states also have to lift their game. And I'm calling on your government, on the Berejiklian government, to commit, like we have, to fund the disability advocates post-July 2018. And the reason is that you're still going to have issues. You're still going to have access issues. We're still going to have many issues that people with disability face. We have disability employment is low. Access for people with disability travelling on public transport. These are still issues that are there. They're not going to go away. And I do take note about what you're saying about choice, because unfortunately people who are living in group homes did not have choice with providers. So I dispute that point that you've made.
Sophie, you've raised a number of issues.
Just quickly, Ray.
Yeah, look, and I come back to again, we've provided $1.5 million for advocates going into next year. The federal government committed already to an additional $60 million. But once again, whereas advocacy provided lobbying on behalf of the government for funding, that funding is secured on behalf of disability, on behalf of people with disability going forward. They are front and centre in terms of the NDIS. Our government has gladly led the way in this historic reform, and it will provide greater choice for people. They themselves will become the best advocates on behalf of the choice of services on their life.
So you're saying you're not going to continue funding?
No, I've said that we are continuing funding.
Post-July 2018?
The federal government have already suggested they are providing $60 million of funding on behalf of advocacy, and the funding is a record funding in New South Wales of $6.4 billion.
We will have to leave it there, unfortunately. This is a debate that could go on for some time, and will, no doubt. But thank you both very much for joining us this afternoon on what is a very important issue.
A pleasure.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, do stay with us here on Newsday. Coming up, we'll have more on Laurie Daly's sacking as New South Wales coach, and Gazza does a runner amid talk he wants out at the Gold Coast.
It's spring racing time.
It's UBET's Rosehill money back. If your horse finishes second or third in races 1 to 5 at Rosehill, get real money back. Up to $50. Money back even if you don't back the winner.
UBET. Gamble responsibly.
Get to Godfrey's for half-price deals like this. Half price for this powerful Hoover hand stick. It comes with a deep cleaning brush and quickly turns into a hand vac for a total top-to-bottom clean. Now half price, an incredible $149. Half-price deals, but only at Godfrey's.
British Paint saves you time with paint and primer in one. To prove it, we've set the ultimate test. A beautiful finish fast, even over bare plasterboard and dark colours. British Paint's Paint and Prime.
Want to take life off hold and do what you want now? You can, with a $5,000 to $35,000 personal loan from Direct Money that's up to 3% lower than the Big Four. That's right, up to 3% lower. So why not get the money you need to do whatever you've been putting off, and do it now? Maybe you've been dreaming of a new car, a really awesome holiday, updating a few things around the home, or even consolidating some of your debts. Direct Money can help with a $5,000 to $35,000 personal loan that's up to 3%